Hello Year 2 and welcome back to the Twits. Today we are going to be reading chapters 20, 21 and 22. Chapter 20. Still no bird pie for Mr. Twit. Mr. Twit wasn't going to wait another week for his bird pie supper. He loved bird pie. It was his favourite meal. So that very same day, he went after the birds again. This time, he smeared all the top bars of the monkey cage with sticky glue, as well as the branches of the big dead tree. "Now I'll get you," he said, "whichever one you sit on." Do you think Mr. Twit is going to be successful? Do you think he's going to catch the birds? Or do you think he's not going to catch the birds? What do you think? Write your answer down. The monkeys crouched inside the cage, watching all this. And later on, when the roly-poly bird came swooping in for an evening chat, they shouted out, "Don't land on our cage, roly-poly bird! It's covered in sticky glue! So is the tree!" And that evening, as the sun went down and all the birds came in again to roost, the roly-poly bird flew round and round the monkey cage and the big dead tree, singing out his warning. "There's sticky stuff now on the cage and the tree. If you land on either, you'll never get free. So fly away, stay up high, or you'll finish up tomorrow in hot bird pie." Chapter 21. Mr. and Mrs. Twit go off to buy guns. The next morning, when Mr. Twit came out with his huge basket, not a single bird was sitting on either the monkey cage or the big dead tree. They were all perched happily on the roof of Mr. Twit's house. The roly-poly bird was up there as well, and the monkeys were in the cage, and the whole lot of them were hooting with laughter at Mr. Twit. Find and copy a synonym for sat. Remember that a synonym is a word that means the same as another word. So can you find the word that means the same as sat? I'll give you a clue. It is around here. Okay? So pause your video and find the answer and write it down. "I'll wipe that silly laugh off your beaks," Mr. Twit screamed at the birds. "I'll get you next time, you filthy feathery frumps. I'll wring your necks, the whole lot of you, and have you bubbling in the pot for bird pie before this day is out." Look at the monkeys' faces. Do they look happy? I don't think so. They look a bit like this. Find and copy an example of alliteration on this page. Remember that alliteration is when words begin with the same sound. "How are you going to do that?" asked Mrs. Twit, who had come outside to see what all the noise was about. "I won't have you smearing sticky glue all over the roof of our house." Mr. Twit got very excited. "I've got a great idea," he cried. He didn't bother to keep his voice down because he didn't think the monkeys could understand. "We'll both go into town right away and we'll buy a gun each," he shouted. "How's that?" "Brilliant!" cried Mrs. Twit, grinning and showing her long yellow teeth. Ooh, can we think of another Roald Dahl character that we've read recently that has yellow teeth? Miss Trunchbull. "We'll buy those big shotguns that spray out 50 bullets or more with each bang." "Exactly," said Mr. Twit. "Lock up the house while I go and make sure the monkeys are safely shut away." Mr. Twit went over to the monkey cage. "Attention!" he barked in his fearsome monkey trainer's voice. "Upside down, all of you, and jump to it. One on top of the other, quick! Get on with it, or you'll feel Mrs. Twit stick across your backsides." Obediently, the poor monkeys stood on their hands and clambered one on top of the other, with Mugglewump at the bottom and the smallest child at the very top. "Now stay there till we come back," Mr. Twit ordered. "Don't you dare move. And don't overbalance. When we return, in 2 or 3 hours' time, I shall expect to find you all in exactly the same position as you are now. You understand?" With that, Mr. Twit marched away. Mrs. Twit went with him, and the monkeys were left alone with the birds. What did Mr. Twit ask Mrs. Twit to do while he made sure the monkeys were locked up? So, to give you a clue, Mr. Twit asked Mrs. Twit to do something, and it is about here. So Mr. Twit says exactly. So start reading there, and that will give you a clue. Next question. How long did Mr. Twit say that he would be gone for? Chapter 22. Mugglewump has an idea. As soon as Mr. and Mrs. Twit had disappeared down the road, the monkeys all flipped back onto their feet the right way up. "Quick, get the key!" Mugglewump called out to the roly-poly bird, who was still sitting on the roof of the house. "What key?" shouted the roly-poly bird. "The key to the door of our cage!" cried Mugglewump. "It's hanging on a nail in the work shed. That's where he always puts it." Put these events into the correct order. Okay, so I've listed some events that happen in the book so far, but they're not in the right order. So what I want you to do is to move them around and write them in the correct order in your book. So the first thing, Mugglewump asked Roly-Poly Bird to get the key. Mr. and Mrs. Twit disappeared down the road. The monkeys all flipped the right way up. The monkeys stood upside down on top of one another. So what out of those 4 events, what is the first thing that happened? Then write that down. Then what is the next thing that happened? Write that down. Then what is the next thing that happened? Write that down. And then finally, what is the most recent thing that happened? And write that down. You might need to rewind a bit of the video to go back to a previous page. Oops. The roly-poly bird flew down and came back with the key in his beak. Mugglewump reached a hand through the bars of the cage and took the key. He put it in the lock and turned it. The door opened. All 4 monkeys leapt out together. "We're free!" cried the 2 little ones. "Where shall we go, Dad? Where shall we hide?" "Don't get excited," said Mugglewump. "Calm down, everybody. Before we escape from this beastly place, we have one very important thing to do." "What?" they asked him. "We are going to turn those terrible Twits upside down." "We're going to what?" they cried. "You must be joking, Dad." "I'm not joking," Mugglewump said. "We're going to turn both Mr. and Mrs. Twit upside down with their legs in the air." "Don't be ridiculous," said the roly-poly bird said. "How can we possibly turn those 2 maggoty old monsters upside down?" We can, cried Mugglewump. "We are going to make them stand on their heads for hours and hours, perhaps forever. Let them see what it feels like for a change." "How?" said the roly-poly bird. Just tell me how." Mugglewump laid his head on one side, and a tiny, twinkling little smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Now and again," he said, "but not very often, I have a brilliant idea. This is one of them. Follow me, my friends, follow me." He scampered off towards the house, and the 3 other monkeys and the roly-poly bird went after him. "Buckets and paintbrushes," cried Mugglewump. "That's what we want next. There are plenty in the work shed. Hurry up, everyone. Get a bucket and a paintbrush. Inside Mr. Twit's work shed, there was an enormous barrel of hug-tight sticky glue, the stuff he used for catching birds. "Fill your buckets," Mugglewump ordered. "We are now going into the big house." Mrs. Twit had hidden the key in the front door under the mat, and Mugglewump had seen her doing it, so it was easy for him to get in. In they went, all 4 monkeys, with their buckets of sticky glue. Then came the roly-poly bird, flying in after them, with a bucket in his beak and a brush in his claw. How did Mugglewump know where the key was kept? Pause the video, write your answer. And we will read chapters 23, 24, and 25 next week. Bye, everyone.